everyone, we are back for part 2 of our overview of Mesopotamian history. Oliver is joining us again. He will be very, very helpful, providing loud noises, possibly screaming. So we thank Oliver for his participation. We also have Thomas sitting on the back of the couch, who may or may not stay. He quite likes history, so he may hang around. Anyway, enough of my foolishness. We're going to be starting at the Kassite Period, which begins where we left off last week, very handily, at the end of the first dynasty of Babylon, that is the dynasty of Hammurabi, who was Hammurabi wasn't defeated, but the dynasty was defeated in 1595, and after that we have what is known as a Dark Age beginning. So we don't have a lot of written evidence for the political activity of the time, so you don't really know what's going on, but when evidence does pick back up again, we see that the power vacuum left by the sack of Babylon and the fall of the Babylonian dynasty has been filled by a group of semi-nomadic people called the Kassites, who set up their capital at the city of Nippur, which is the religious capital of Mesopotamia. And from Nippur we have a very large amount of administrative records, which give us a pretty good idea of how the Kassites ran their territory.
Also, if you see me lean forward and do this, I'm scrolling our notes down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good, but I can't remember all of this information.
We had you fooled though, didn't we?
We did, we really did.
She was just pulling us out of...
I know, thin air.
There you go. Sorry.
Anyway, sorry. We're so funny. So, the Kassites consolidated their power and created, for the first time, what's known as the territorial state of Babylonia. Previously, Babylonia was kind of, as we've said 8 million times by now, a bunch of disparate city-states that at different times were incorporated into kingdoms and empires. This is the point at which it kind of becomes its own, not self-contained unit, but like its own state. So it's united by the Kassite king Burnaburiash, who turns the region into one of the so-called great powers that are represented in the Amarna letters.
We were going to name him Burnaburiash, but...
We were, but kids can be so cruel, so we went for something more conventional.
Sorry.
It was either that or Rasputin. So. Burnaburiash is the second correspondent in the Amarna letters, from Babylonia, and is known for getting upset when the Assyrian king Ashur-uballit writes to the king of Egypt claiming that Assyria is a Babylonian vassal and therefore shouldn't be included in the correspondence. I'll go into that in a little more detail further down. But when Burnaburiash dies, his son, who is also the grandson of the Assyrian king Ashur-uballit, his son gains the throne and is then assassinated. And in retribution, Ashur-uballit invades Babylon, placing a man called Kuroyazu II on the throne, probably also another son of Burnaburiash. Doesn't quite end Kassite rule, but does mark the beginning of Babylonia being under direct control of the Middle Assyrian kingdom. So, the Kassites and the Middle Assyrians both operate in a period that's also known as the Amarna Period, which gets its name from this group of letters that we have, diplomatic correspondence that was discovered in the Egyptian city of Amarna. So this is a period of unprecedented levels of international contact between the great political powers in the region. So these powers are Egypt, Babylon, the Mitanni Empire, Hatti, and then a bit later on Assyria as well. This contact includes conflict. These guys are always coming into war with each other because the boundaries of their empires all meet, which can create some tension. Also includes diplomatic relations, which is why we have the Amarna letters, trade and international marriage. And this diplomacy, as I've said several times, is heavily documented in the Amarna letters. And kind of to be included in this like massive pen pal club was kind of a sign that your kingdom had arrived. You were relevant, you were important, you were worthy of being included in this group of people. So that's the Amarna period and the Amarna letters. The Middle Assyrian, is it an empire? I'd go with kingdom.
I mean, it expands and contracts.
That's true.
Yeah.
So the Middle Assyrian period is roughly from 1365 to 1050 BCE.
Roughly.
I mean, give or take.
It started October 12th.
Give or take a few days.
Sorry.
It's all good. It's kind of begun by Ashur-uballit I, who rules until 1328. Who's a very strong king, and he begins the expansion of the Middle Assyrian kingdom, taking advantage of this conflict between the Hatti and Mitanni kingdoms to ultimately annex the eastern territories that were held by the Mitanni. Following his rule, there's a kind of decline of about 23 years. So I should say that the Middle Assyrian kingdom is characterized by this expansion and contraction of the territory controlled by the Assyrian rulers. So we have an expansion with Ashur-uballit I, and then following his death, there's the contraction and a decline, approximately 23 years. And then beginning with the reign of a man called Adad-nirari I, there's another expansion. So Adad-nirari I, then a king called Shalmaneser, and then Tukulti-Ninurta I, who ultimately annexed the entirety of Syria east of the Euphrates. And then we have another contraction of about 75 years. And then a final resurgence of power spearheaded by two kings, Ashur-resh-ishi and Tiglath-Pileser I. We've got a lot of Jimbob I, Jimbob II, Jimbob III, which it can get a little confusing. The following period, which Josh will cover, the neo-Assyrian Empire, we see a lot of these same names recurring. When I go through and do the more detailed historical videos, I'll draw it out for everyone because I get lost. So following Tiglath-Pileser I, we have the final decline of the Middle Assyrian Empire of around 25 years. And by the year 1050, a group of people known as the Arameans rule most of northern Syria, much of Mesopotamia, and the Assyrian kingdom that encompassed at one point most of Syria and all of Babylonia is now restricted just to the Assyrian heartland in northern Mesopotamia. So now we have the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which Josh is going to cover.
And I think maybe it's a good idea to just take a second and think about a good way to think about Mesopotamian history. So I guess there are several different ways you could do it, but you can either try to get bogged down in this king reigned during this period and had all these specific things happen, which, I suppose at a certain point you need to do if you're going to do research into a particular area, something specific. But in general, the best way to do this, probably for the purposes of most people watching, and for us too, is to think broadly about the historical periods. So keeping big, broad things in mind and keeping a general idea of the major periods as they go. So, for example, when you come into the second millennium, you think about the old Babylonian period, and like we said last week, you have these disparate cities that are kind of ruled. Somebody in a city, a king in a city, kind of gets control over a certain region, and then the power shifts a little bit, but you have all these vying kingdoms, kingdoms vying for power. Hammurabi kind of takes control of a big expanse, and then that falls during the second half. So that's sort of the first half of the second millennium. The second half of the second millennium is essentially you have major kingdoms, Assyria, Babylonia, Egypt, and they're all part of this big club.
And just negotiating power relations between them and territorial control through the letters that we mentioned earlier.
That's right. And you can see the individual histories, the individual trajectories of the for example, the Assyrian Empire. You have the old Assyrian period that we talked about with
the trade in Anatolia.
Right. Then you have the Middle Assyrian period, which is this end of the second millennium, and you can think about that individually as a expansion and contraction. They get strong, they campaign out, particularly to the west, and then they get weak. The king gets weak, and they kind of contract back into the heartland, and then they get a strong king or two or three, and they expand back out. But again, that's Assyria. So, in the big picture during this period, you have these major powers, the great powers club that are interacting with one another diplomatically. All of that sort of falls apart. You have the Arameans that come in, and beginning in the first part of the first century of the first millennium, you have the neo-Assyrians. So Old Assyrian period, Middle Assyrian period, neo-Assyrian period. And the neo-Assyrian period starts in 934 under the king Ashur-dan II. And he begins this process of annual or regular campaigns.
Which is new. This hasn't really happened before.
Yeah.
It's been important, not theologically speaking, but it's been an important part of kingship to be militarily successful. But this is the first time where you see annual campaigning with an imperial mindset.
And it ends up working itself, that ideology starts working itself into even the dating system. So they start saying, in my third campaign, in my fourth campaign, in my fifth campaign, which, means fifth year of his reign. So it's very important. So when they're campaigning, when they're going out into these military excursions, generally speaking, you see expansion because the king is strong and he's trying to reach out, extend his reign. So that begins in the first part of the first millennium in 934, and that sort of thing off and on continues. Ashurnasirpal II, who moved the capital city of Assyria to the city of Kalhu or Nimrud, and there's a beautiful palace that he put together, and I'm sure that Megan will.
If you've seen neo-Assyrian palace reliefs, they're probably from Ashurnasirpal II.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is one of Megan's things that she likes to do, so she'll probably put some videos together on it. But really, it's anyway, it's really neat. But he has sustained military campaigns. And, again, you don't have to remember these names. Shalmaneser III, he campaigns really until about 830. And then at that point, we have something similar to what happened in the Middle Assyrian period, where the country, the king, whatever, gets kind of weak. And so there's contraction back into itself because they're not campaigning. So just remember that. If they're campaigning out, generally speaking, they're expanding, they're getting, they're strong. If the king doesn't campaign out, he's weak, and
they're losing territory.
They're losing territory. That's right, because there's always another group trying to get that land. That contraction remains, that weakness remains until the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, and we're getting ready to get into some kings that. About if you're a biblical, you're into studying the Bible, you've probably heard these names. So Tiglath-Pileser III, 745, he comes in as a very strong king. So he halts the decline, he makes administrative and structural changes to the country, and he campaigns to the west hard. And there's some big things that happen during his reign. Shalmaneser V, that's the neo-Assyrian ruler that sacks Samaria, so northern Israel. Remember, Israel is made up of two kingdoms, Samaria and Judah. And so Samaria falls first in the north in 722, and then Judah in 586 under the Neo-Babylonians. We'll talk about that in a second. So that's who Shalmaneser V is. Sargon II, he moves the capital to another city. Then Sennacherib moves it back. He moves it to Nineveh. He moves it again to Nineveh. And Sennacherib is a really important king because he is known because he has so many problems with the south. Now, if you remember...
So, I just want to say that...
I'm amazing?
You are.
That's so nice. She's amazing.
Babylonia, that is southern Mesopotamia, there's a recurring trend through Mesopotamian history where if the northern states expand and gain control of Babylonia, they either don't keep it very long or they have a lot of problems with revolts and local Babylonian rulers deciding actually they don't want to be ruled by the north anymore. They want to be their own... thanks, honey. They want to be their own political entity.
I shouldn't smile at that. It's just he does it a lot. You always have such clever things that you say when he does it. Sorry.
So the problems that Sennacherib has they're not new. They're a continuation of a very, very long-standing trend. But he goes nuclear on them in a way that hasn't been seen really before.
Yeah, and it's one of the things Brinkman, he's got a book out. It's an older book, but excellent argument showing how the neo-Assyrian Empire, one of its major downfalls was the south, was Babylonia, because they keep revolting, they keep fighting, and the north keeps having to dump money into campaigns and to, going down there and trying to deal with it, and it bankrupts them. And so, it's a significant problem. So anyway, but again, neo-Assyrian, same thing sort of as the Middle Assyrian, in the sense that you have strong kings, then you have weak kings and strong kings. So Sennacherib is definitely a strong king, but he has all these problems with Babylonia, and finally he gets fed up with them, and he goes down and he sacks Babylon, which is a big deal. And
not a popular move.
No, and what ends up happening is this plays into, if you remember my video about the Akitu festival, when the Assyrian king goes down, or the Babylonian king, well, the Assyrian king in particular, goes down, and I love how
Josh just turned Siri on.
Oh, that's what happens. Every time I say Assyria, she thinks I say, "Hey Siri."
She's ignoring you now.
I wasn't calling you.
Sorry, I can't add that to your library.
You probably
Seem to be subscribed to Apple Music.
you probably can't hear that, but she's anyway.
She's chatting away.
So, oh my gosh! All right, I don't remember what I was saying.
Sacking of Babylon, the Akitu
Right.
festival.
So the Akitu festival, the king comes down and he's grabbed by the ears by the priest, and he's put on his knees, and he has to say,
Smacked in
"I
the face.
haven't sacked Babylon. I haven't destroyed Babylon. I haven't destroyed your people." Well, this festival is a Babylonian festival, right? It's because Sennacherib. It's basically saying, "I'm not Sennacherib. I didn't come down and destroy Babylon." So, anyhow, Esarhaddon, his son, rebuilds Babylon to try to make up for it, to get back into a good relationship, whatever. Ashurbanipal, if you've heard about...
Esarhaddon is also really cool because is he the first Mesopotamian king to conquer Egypt?
Yes.
It's under Esarhaddon that the neo-Assyrian Empire expands as far as Egypt, which I just think is really awesome because that's
right.
not happened before.
That's right.
They've never got quite that far. But he does it. Yay.
Good.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's good.
I helped.
Caught me off guard there. Right. So, good. So Ashurbanipal. No, it's good. Ashurbanipal. If you've heard about the library of Ashurbanipal, that's the library at Nineveh, and we have thousands of texts that come from there. Very important place for literature, emerologies, all those sorts of things. We'll talk about that later. Anyhow, so but by 612, I've gone into all this detail I don't want to go into, but by 612, Babylonia has gained a great deal of power under the king Nabopolassar. So Nabopolassar has come into power, and he's started to consolidate things down south, and he's moving forward. And by 612, he's inflicted great defeat upon the Assyrians. The sort of remnant ruler or remnant administration has to pick up and flee to Haran, the city of Haran, where they're finally defeated in 609. And that's it for the Assyrian Empire. They don't come back. Now, Nabopolassar begins the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and Nebuchadnezzar II, who's a king that you've probably heard of if you've done any biblical studies, he's the king that sacks Jerusalem in 586. You have some other kings that we'll go into more detail about when we do the section on the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Marduk, Neriglissar, Labashi Marduk. But Nabonidus is one that we do want to talk about for just a second. He's the last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, 555 to 539. So we're coming up right to the midpoint of the first millennium. And he does this really strange thing that people have spilled much ink over. And he leaves Babylon as the king. He leaves Babylon to go live in the Arabian desert in Tema. And he leaves Belshazzar in charge. And if you've read through the book of Daniel, you see this, the writing on the wall scene where they're banqueting. And anyhow, depicting the fall of Babylon, which of course happens. Cyrus comes in and essentially takes it without a fight in 539. He just kind of walks into Babylon and takes it.
And they're like, thank goodness, a king who actually cares about the city.
Yeah.
Because Nabonidus moving to Tema was kind of sacrilegious.
Yeah, so maybe not so much the move, and we'll talk about this in a bit just to give you a taste. He installs his daughter as the priestess at Or, which is a common thing to do,
normal.
Very normal, but not so much during this period, I don't think.
No.
And what he does, the god of the city of Or was Nana, or Sin,
the moon god.
And what ends up happening, of course, Marduk is the main deity in Babylonia, and so the priests of Marduk don't like that Sin Nana is making a comeback, and when Nabonidus comes back, he starts instituting all these pro-Sin reforms. Thank you, that's the word I was going for. And of course, the Marduk priesthood doesn't like it at all. Remember, the New Year's festival, the Akitu festival, is all about taking Marduk by the hand and going forth in procession. So so the New Year's festival stopped for a time period, which is a huge problem. Anyway, we'll get into all those details later. But
theologically speaking, Cyrus was seen as something of a savior by the Marduk priesthood.
That's right.
Which is one of the reasons why he's had such an easy time capturing the city of Babylon.
That's right. Also, practically speaking, because
they had a massive army.
Yeah, and right, that too. But they were weak. I mean, Babylonia had become weak by that point. So that's it for the Neo-Babylonian Empire. 539, they're done, and the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire, takes over. And take it away, Megan.
So I'm going to preface this by saying that the Achaemenids are way outside my field of specialization.
Mine too.
So this is going to be very cursory, but when I return and revisit them in their own little video, there will be much more detail. But the Achaemenids rule Mesopotamia from 539 to 331 BCE. The king called, as we said, Cyrus II captures Babylon in 539 and is succeeded by Cambyses II, who further expands the Persian Empire, capturing Egypt in 525 BC.
And we get a lot of this information from this inscription called the Behistun inscription, and it's in the side of a mountain, rock face. It's really cool. Google it. Unless there's an image that we can put up.
I'll find one.
Okay, cool. So by this point, you will have already seen it.
And then we have King Darius I, who is most famous for attempting to invade Greece, but is rebuffed quite substantially at the Battle of Marathon.
Which is where the bar came from. The Marathon bar. Never mind.
You mean the race?
No, like the power bar, the energy bar.
I've not heard of that.
It's
sorry.
I'm trying to think of every bad joke that I could tell, and that was probably pretty pretty high on the list for bad. Just ignore that. I'm gonna sit over here quietly.
So, sorry. So following Darius, there's a series of pretty successful Persian kings. They're very good at what they do. I think one of the secrets to their success is they don't try and impose their own beliefs on the civilizations they conquer. The Persians are very, very good about allowing cities and regions to maintain their own religious traditions, their own cultures. They're not forced to suddenly start worshipping Persian gods. From what I've read, Persian rule wasn't terribly onerous on the peoples that they captured.
And if you think about it, just to kind of add to that, one of the things that the Assyrians did is they relocated people, right? So because rebellions were such a big deal, if they went over and conquered a people group over here, what they would do is they would take some of the people out of here and some of the people out of here and switch them, right? So now you have these people around you that you don't know. They speak a different language often. And so, you don't have things in common. And so revolting sort of isn't, it's hard to do. And this is why the Achaemenid kings are seen in such a great light in the Bible, because Xerxes, Artaxerxes, these stories arise about how they send, the people back.
They let people go home.
Yeah, and they say, because the thought is, go back home, worship your God, and pray to him for me. Yeah. Right? So that's why he's seen, these kings are seen in a very favorable light in the biblical text. Sorry, go ahead.
No. And as pretty much everyone at that time did, they were defeated by Alexander the Great. Sorry, that was a bit of an abrupt transition. But it happened. Alexander the Great in 331.
Alexander the OK. I said I was going to be quiet.
You did.
Fail.
But he came down from Macedonia. We've lost it now. I'm sorry.
It's gone. Should we edit all this? No, we're going to keep it.
We're going to keep it.
Awesome.
Yep. So the Persian Empire is defeated by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. And he makes Babylon his capital in 324 BC, and then sadly he's assassinated there the following year, which sucks for him.
It does, indeed.
Yep.
So we were going to go into the Seleucid period.
To go into the Seleucid period, and then we realised that neither of us know anything about the Seleucids.
That's not...
I know nothing about the Seleucids.
Well,
he knows something I don't.
Our interest in it is more specific. Maybe we'll do a video on the Seleucid, the interesting things about the Seleucid period. So, Uruk during the Seleucid period is really important for rituals and tablets that we have from there. And your eyes are glazing over.
I didn't cover the Seleucids at all.
Neither. Well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
Sorry.
Anyhow, but we'll stop here, and I feel okay about doing that because Mark van der Mieroop stopped here, so that doesn't mean anything to anybody. Okay, we really have to edit all this out, or we should keep it.
We're fine.
Oh.
We're fine.
So let me summarize, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
What we talked about today. So the Middle Assyrian, again, thinking big, fly over. Don't try to remember all these details. That'd be silly. So Middle Assyrian period. Well, I guess I can start earlier than that. So the Amarna period, after the first dynasty of Babylon is defeated, and there's that 100 years of like a dark age. When the lights come back on, you have these major powers that have developed, and they're corresponding with each other. There's international diplomacy, that sort of thing. Ultimately, the Assyrians, the Middle Assyrian period, or the Middle Assyrian kingdom develops, and you see it characterized by, in the second half of the second millennium, you see expansion and contraction, and see strong king, weak king, strong king, weak king, or strong kings, weak king. Anyway, That ends right about at the end of the second millennium when the Arameans come in. These tribes, we'll talk about them later. The neo-assyrian empire begins 934, so end of the 934. We'll just say that. And again, same sort of thing: strong king, weak king, strong king, weak king. They tend to be longer periods. They expand or extend out their reign further, but it's because they're regularly campaigning and trying to get more and more territory. They have major problems with Babylonia in the south, all these revolts. It's a very fragmented area, different people groups down there, and they're all vying for power. Ultimately, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, is defeated in 609. They're done. And then the Neo-Babylonian Empire comes in, and after about less than 100 years, they are defeated by the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire sort of undergoes something similar, and they're defeated by Alexander the Great. So, that is Mesopotamian history in a really cool, amazing, good-looking nutshell. We really probably should edit that out. All right.
I promise we'll be more coherent next time.
I can't promise that.
I'll be more coherent next time.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. And please email us with any questions or leave a message. And do me a favor, if you haven't subscribed yet and liked our page or liked our... I don't know what you like. But if you could subscribe, that'd be awesome, because we're putting out videos almost every day. And I actually think
it's been every day for the past 3 weeks.
I think that's why we're this tired, and because we're doing it for you. But I think they really are cool, because we're finding topics that are really interesting, and we try to make them connect to the Bible sometimes, and try to make them connect to crazy people that think that the Sumerians were aliens, So, but yeah, subscribe and get all our latest videos. I think it'll be a good time. I should stop talking now.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.